Hello and welcome to Series 9 of In the Spotlight with Quo Circa, the definitive podcast on digital disruption in the print industry. I'm Louella Director of Quo Circa, and today I'm joined by Will Parker, Director of Sales, Marketing and Strategy at Datasec. Today we will be discussing how Datasec is bringing identity-native infrastructure management to the world of print security. So welcome to the show, Will. It's great to have you here today.
Thanks, Louella. It's great to be here.
So shall we get started if you can tell us a bit about your career history and your role at Datasec?
Absolutely. So I'm a bit of a veteran of the print industry, having started in the early 90s with Canon at the emergence of the first digital black and white and colour devices when they first started as networked productivity machines. And at that time, we were chasing the small footprint HP laser jets off every desk and replacing them with more of the hub-based approach with the MFDs or MFPs, as we commonly call them now. And it's funny how things have come in a kind of full circle as the footprints have started to get smaller over time, and we've seen this move from just digital and on-premise network devices to the move to the cloud. So I've spent my whole career on the generally technical pre-sales side and solution architecture as a digital imaging professional, both as an individual contributor and as a leader, most recently with HP over in Boise, Idaho. And prior to that, I was leading the technical consulting community for APJ from Singapore. So having moved back to Australia for family reasons, principally, because we love Boise, Idaho, and the work at HP was fascinating and moving at a real pace in very interesting areas. I joined Datasec, who I'd been working with actually within HP since they came on board with the WorkPath extensibility platform. So that's essentially an Android extensibility platform that runs on the MFPs. And allows us to create all sorts of applications and productivity solutions. So having brought some of that partnering to our biggest clients in the world, in my role in Boise, I was able to join Datasec, having returned home to Australia and work with Paul and the team, bringing some of these authentication solutions to the fore.
Yeah, and it's really interesting actually, because it sounds like you've really had a journey throughout the goals around security with MFPs and, like you say, moving from desktop to shared environments. And obviously there's a lot of security risks inherent in that. Could you tell us a bit more about Datasec for the audience who may not be familiar with the company? Maybe share a bit about its strategy in the market and its go-to-market approach.
Sure, absolutely. I mean, Datasec is an information security and software developer startup out of Melbourne, Australia, with expertise and a wide range of quite specialised intellectual property around cryptography, authentication, and authorization. And we've got some pretty specialised technologies as well around document security using facial recognition and public key infrastructure, so private and public key pair solutions that actually play very directly into a lot of the very relevant areas we're seeing taking off both in the consumer space and enterprise now, such as passkeys, the sort of technologies that we see being driven by the FIDO Alliance and the working groups trying to make sure that we can get to a world which is secure but not encumbered by passwords and the risks associated with sharing secrets across an open internet. We typically think of as zero trust type solutions. And the concepts of multi-factor authentication as a way of overcoming some of the limitations and the phishable, the phishing resistance that's so important to avoid bad actors gaining access to networks across the internet when we have edge devices. So Datasec has a particular approach to this. We try and implement solutions that focus on the customer's environment as the center of the universe. So we like to think that the solutions should orbit the customer's environment and the customer's identity-centric solutions, their security posture, and where they want to go with minimal change management.
Yeah, and I think you touched on a few areas there, such as zero trust and multi-factor authentication. And I think for the print industry, there are, I guess, two main areas in terms of potential device compromise. It's the actual device, or it's the documents and content on the device. Mm-hmm. And it's very much an evolving landscape in this broader cybersecurity threat landscape. And we're seeing that print security is gradually moving higher on the IT security agenda. I think more CISOs and more organisations are becoming aware of the potential risks. What are you seeing in terms of particular customer challenges amongst your customer base, and any particular market trends you want to talk about? Because I think what you mentioned there around passkeys is really interesting in that it's very much focused on the individual rather than an organisation. So yeah, if you can maybe share a bit more background on that, that'd be great.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, it's a complicated and fast evolving space, and a very interesting one to look at the challenges of specific to our industry. The main reason for that is that typically, and passkeys are coming to the forefront of people's minds as we're being invited to use them to log into websites from what we would categorize as our own trusted devices or personal devices. And these are devices where a chain of trust can exist from the individual to their personal phone, tablet, laptop. So Windows Hello and the facial recognition on our phones is typically a very good way of ensuring that if we put keys on that device, unlocking that device with our biometric allows us to extend that chain of trust then to the sites that we want to visit, the services that we consume from the cloud. So we're seeing this with, PayPal accounts and internet banking and all sorts of things that we know that we need to secure. And we can do because we're working with a personal or a personal device. The real challenge then becomes accessing sensitive data on a shared device. And typically, an MFP or an MFD is a shared device. It's one of the last devices sort of left on-prem in the modern hybrid business world. And of course, they're also distributed devices. So we'll have some that are more or less personal devices at home, but it's really the same machine as you would have in a shared workspace or in a collaborative office or a dedicated on-prem solution. So this is a real challenge because most of these devices aren't built to handle multiple sessions. They don't have the ability to have multiple user accounts on them that persist from one session to another. That session essentially is opened when the person logs onto the device. It's closed or erased when the person signs off or walks away from the device, taps on, taps off. And so without any persistence of the session, you don't really have an easy way to establish a trust relationship with that device and then the services that you consume through it. So we have this concept, we try and think of it like this. We prefer to think of signing into the network rather than onto the device. So historically, IT departments and MSPs would actually be, required to help us set up and configure a device for the business. You need to synchronize address books, perhaps account lists and directories with either your on-prem Active Directory or more in sort of the modern cloud world, the Azure Active Directory or some sort of cloud service. And this is actually quite a challenge for MSPs and IT departments because all of the printer manufacturers have different ways of configuring the device through their web browser interfaces. They have a completely different technology stack for extensibility. They have different ways of securing, authenticating, and authorizing onto the device. So one of the things that we've tried to do is look at it from the perspective of signing into the business network rather than onto the asset or onto the device. And that's actually allowed us to leverage the Azure Active Directory in one case, or potentially any kind of cloud-based identity management solution, and have the sort of locus of control there in the cloud under the customer's normal control that they would apply to owned devices and any other shared devices. So for instance, another shared device that would typically crop up on the business network nowadays are the Wi-Fi connections, Wi-Fi access points, smart meeting rooms and other business assets that are shared. And these have the same sort of identity and access control challenges that we would see on a managed MFP or MFD. So it's quite a challenge. And the best way to do that is to leverage the tools that AWS, Google, Microsoft have put in place to implement zero trust. Because passkeys work very well on an owned device, but without persistent sessions or multiple sessions, you can't easily leverage that on a device, an endpoint like a printer.
Yeah, and it makes sense, I guess, like you say, to work with those hyperscalers around their cloud security capabilities to leverage that rather than building proprietary security solutions by device. So that seems to be the direction that Datasec are going in terms of identity management. And to kind of really understand a bit more around how Datasec is positioning itself in that landscape. I know the company's very, as you mentioned, focused on identity management, and sounds like you've been innovating in the space for some time through your partnerships with HP and other OEM partners. So could you tell us a bit more about how Datasec is positioning itself and some of the novel approaches it's building around identity at the network rather than device level?
Yeah, for sure. So the approach that I touched upon earlier that we find can work very well is to leverage an extensibility layer with an application suite that brings both the authentication experience and then a productivity experience to a device that we characterize or coin the phrase of a smart document exchange. So most of these devices now have got that smart device type characteristics, touch screens, apps, the ability to actually write customized programs to meet people's specific needs. And where they're sitting on the edge of the network, they need to be secured like any other edge or perimeter device, which means zero trust concepts, endpoint management. This is not easy to do. And, we saw your interview recently with Sharp around the relationship with Bitdefender and the ability to actually start to build partnerships to extend the type of security propositions that we expect on all of our laptops and on our phones and within the broader ecosystem to devices that perhaps get forgotten sometimes. And since the MFDs are the last devices really can't move to the cloud, all the servers and services have moved to the cloud, but things like wireless access points, shared computer systems and MFDs are left on site. So they have to be shared and they still need to be secured. So we take this concept of no endpoint left behind. And a particular good example of that is the solution that we built with HP. They have, of course, the Wolf security program, which allows them to harden the device from the hardware and firmware and software layer up. And we like to think that we bring an identity layer on the top of that. So this is infrastructure access management with an identity native emphasis. And that's really important because it allows us to actually go one step beyond just transacting with, for instance, a building pass and a password or a username and a password to a proper multi-factor authentication that involves a biometric, such as using the trusted device I alluded to before, like the user's mobile phone. That way we manage to create a passwordless experience, which really fits the smart device context, because typing passwords and usernames on glass screens is not easy. It's hard at the best of times to type the complex passwords that we've had to be trained to use, even on our normal keyboards. And it's interesting that we often get them wrong and just take for granted that getting the password wrong once or twice is just a fact of life. Now, with a password manager on a laptop, maybe mandated by the company, we have a much easier job of managing proper, strong, complex passwords. But even the most complex password in the world is no help if somebody can phish that password and then simply use it to sign in. And so there's a truism in modern security parlance, which is that quite often now attackers or hackers don't break in, they log in. And so if they can get your password and be you, especially as an administrator, they can create another account and pivot the attack, sign in with multiple accounts, and then perhaps very stealthily exfiltrate sensitive data from the network. Now, MFDs are actually very obvious targets for this, typically social engineering type efforts. We know, for instance, people have been able to steal PIN numbers from ATMs using thermal imaging cameras to see the fingerprints left on the pad. It reduces the number of guesses that you have to make for a PIN number. You can do this easily with very cheap and readily available webcams that can be placed in buildings that are tiny. So the shoulder surfing concept and key logging from a smart glass type device is really quite a trivial exercise. If you want to get in, these types of devices perhaps not the obvious choice that we would think of, but for a bad actor who wants to use social engineering to phish credentials, they're a very obvious target. So, what we tried to do is therefore leverage state-of-the-art or best practice multi-factor authentication, which involves a trusted device, a biometric, and some sort of one-time PIN, which we're pretty familiar with, using a solution like Microsoft Authenticator or Authy or Ping. And what this does is it proves presence at the device at a point in time from a trusted owned device. So you actually have these multiple possession factors and the biometric to sign into the device, as well as a one-time PIN to provide the multi-factors, and never actually pass a password across the network that could be phished or that could be socially engineered. So this actually is proper zero trust and strong security. It's not perfect by any means, and there are all sorts of ways that bad actors can circumvent these things. But compared to two-factor authentication, where, for instance, SIM card swapping can intercept an SMS with a passcode in it, or just using badges, which sometimes feel a lot more convenient. If we think about how important the information on the business is, we need to have strong authentication for it. It's quite critical when you start logging into the network, not just onto the device, that I can actually be using my Outlook inbox and my address book and all of my OneDrive and SharePoint and Teams assets at a shared device. So I need to be able to sign in securely, make sure that I can't be tailgated, and when I sign off that session was secured and properly destroyed.
And it's fascinating because it's just really demonstrating how sophisticated cyber attackers can now be in terms of being able to infiltrate the network, but also the fact that printers and MFPs also are processing a lot of confidential and sensitive information, but they can also be those ingress points to the network. So, quite significant security risks. And you mentioned all these sort of the features around security. What do you feel is the balance? Because there's always this balance between security and convenience. Yes. And how are you addressing that with some of these solutions?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's really at the heart of what we've tried to engineer with our current set of solutions. We call it convenience without compromise. And getting rid of passwords is actually the key there. It literally is. The passwords are cumbersome. If you have to type a complex password in on the glass, you're much more likely to make one that you can memorize because you can't use a password manager. Or you defeat the use of the password manager by writing it down, putting it in a notepad on your phone so that you can copy it or get it right. And it's cumbersome. So getting rid of the password is a really key step. And this is being done with public key infrastructure, certificates and cryptography on owned devices for the individual and consumers with a lot of success. So the FIDO2 standard is making that literally fast identity online a reality for the passwordless world. On shared devices and for the enterprise, it's much more difficult because we've got decades of understanding how to manage passwords and how to reset credentials and deal with people forgetting passwords or mandating the refresh of those credentials. And so passkeys are going to take quite some time, especially on shared devices, to get right. But the convenience without compromise comes from developing an application that can run on these devices that leverages the customer's main identity-centric or identity-native management solution. And actually, I have a slide that perhaps we could walk through. It's a little bit complex, but if I build it from the start, it should make some sense. So this is a fairly simple representation of the end user within a business. There's various devices that we would consider typically trusted or personal devices, tablets, phones, laptops. We've got various things that we do day to day and that we need to do within the business, whether that's workflows, dealing with paper or electronic documents, and then doing constructive things with them like OCRing or turning them into native document formats. And typically, we have a layer around us which allows us to access these types of things. And as I've said already this evening, the trusted devices are very easy to establish that chain of trust with, especially if you then connect it all to, for example, in this case, we've got Microsoft Entra there as an example, because it has an identity management system associated with a whole productivity layer of applications. So as a business cloud, everyone's familiar with Microsoft Office, and the Office 365 environment provides both that identity native access control as well as the productivity layer. But it's more complicated when we get to the need to secure shared devices. And so here we can see the smart meeting rooms, smart buildings, IoT devices, AR and VR, smart lockers, wireless access points, and all sorts of shared devices that sit within this perimeter of the business's data, but need to be protected and can't be protected in the same way as the personal devices. And then beyond that, we have this huge extended ecosystem of cloud services, because not everybody is consuming only the Microsoft product. And so this is where FIDO2, WebAuthn, OAuth2, and OIDC, OpenID Connect, are industry standards and best practice that can be leveraged to make the zero trust a reality and ensure that even in a hybrid cloud environment, we can reach even further afield to other services we might want to consume. But at the end of the day, there are all a range of perimeters there, but the user has to remain at the center. And it's a very complex ecosystem, but the standards do exist actually to very effectively harness zero trust. The key and the trick is to actually implement that on the MFPs, on the printers, in a convenient way, which doesn't compromise security.
Yeah, so that's a really powerful visualization of that whole complex ecosystem. Do you see any challenges with applying that identity native infrastructure management across a multi-vendor fleet? Or is that one of the benefits of being able to do that regardless of the brand of device?
So it's a real challenge with multi-vendor for the same reasons that we talked about earlier, with MSPs, for instance, experiencing a customer who's decided to switch printer fleets, and you know the stack is quite a different set of technologies. However, as we see more and more a move towards having extensibility layers on these devices, the smart document exchange component can come to the fore. So you can either run an identity native infrastructure access management solution on the device and log into the network from the device, or you could leverage the existing partners and solutions out there that are already bringing authentication and authorization for enterprise pool print solutions to customers, and incorporate that through use of APIs and collaborative efforts between security partners like Datasec and the enterprise pool print and scan partners to provide that to existing solutions that already support multi-vendors. The key will, though, of course, always be that the devices that don't have a capability to be hardened on the edge with something like the Bitdefender relationship, the Wolf security solution, will actually be somewhat a risk exposure for customers. So, I think that we have open standards that can address this, but not all of the hardware is of the characteristic that I describe as a smart document exchange. And I think that's going to be really important as we go more and more and more to cloud and hybrid environments and devices that are exposed to the internet. And we can see this with things like the White House mandate coming into force about, government agencies who have cloud-facing devices needing to have a phishing-resistant MFA solution. And we're seeing that in Australia, certainly in the US, and we can expect to see that across the EU as well.
Yeah, and I think, as you say, this is something that's going to create challenges, but also opportunities for the print industry, ensuring that they've got these capabilities and they can demonstrate that they're able to adhere to these strict regulations that are coming out. And actually, I wanted to understand a bit more about the implications around AI and cybersecurity, particularly, I think it was yesterday, Microsoft just introduced their Copilot Plus PCs with AI features. And I think that's really a kind of turning point in the PC industry in terms of having on-device AI with NPUs and so on. And I'm just curious as what your views are around the use of AI in relation to security at a print level. Will we see on-device AI on printers and MFPs? And how can the print industry really ensure that it's leveraging AI and not getting left behind in this AI gold rush, I guess we could call it?
Absolutely. Again, the pace of change is enormous. And I think one of the identity native aspects of this is going to be not just the identity of the users who are opening sessions on devices and accessing services through an MFP or an IoT device, but There will be bots, there will be agents, AI agents that will need to have their own identity and their own credentials verified in order to make sure when they're acting on our behalf, that they're doing so in a truly accountable way. The Microsoft ecosystem is, I think, a very good example at the moment of the way that AI is going to start shaping a lot of the things that we use in our industry every day. A good example of that might be the fact that the way the co-pilots work is to leverage a large language model like ChatGPT 4.x to work with all of a customer's data within the walls, if you like, of their Microsoft Azure tenant, without bleeding or leaking that information out into the large language model that ChatGPT can draw upon from the rest of the world. And of course, that's essential if we're going to use AI. We can't have our secret launch plans and strategies leaking out into the broader world, or the competition will simply ask the AI, what are our competition doing? Now, Microsoft have a very good view of this, which provides that security. But it will mean that there will be a consolidation into, for instance, in this example, and Google's the same with Gemini, but in this case, from, for instance, customers using an external storage solution on AWS into, say, OneDrive. And so we're going to start seeing potentially an ingress into the Microsoft 365 tenant in order to leverage the AI co-pilots that are going to be available there. Now, you can think of any number of ways that this could play out, because the page is not the paper. And in our industry, it's what's on the paper that we ingest, and it's what we want on the paper that we print. So those pixels and that digital representation of the page is what's all important. We will definitely be using AIs to, for instance, look for specific sets of invoices with particular business relationships over a particular period of time and want them to be produced in a PDF and then printed out, or we will want to organize and index our metadata for data that we're ingesting through the scan solutions. And again, that is going to be most powerfully leveraged with co-pilots if it remains within the Microsoft stack, within that Microsoft tenant. Now, from a printing standpoint, I think that's where we're going to see universal print playing a big role on a couple of different fronts. Microsoft's conditional access should actually provide a certain amount of that, advanced rules and routing capability in due course. But also when you think about reporting, if all of the logs, who printed what, where and when and how much, are all again within that tenant, within the same set of logs, and AIs can parse that information out and provide us with a human language response, we might see, Power BI being asked to produce reports for us about, who's printing the most in the business, what's the split between black and white and color, how much double siding there is, and is there any anomalous printing going on? There's the typical sort of thing that an AI can answer extremely effectively, very quickly and immediately from the big data that it has available. So, does this represent, a serious existential threat for the traditional mature solutions? Possibly, yes, but that doesn't mean, though, that universal print as an enterprise pool print solution is anywhere near mature with the feature sets that we've come to rely upon across the industry with the enterprise pool print solutions and partners. And I think Microsoft's actually waking up to that fact as they move, further down the line with universal print and start to move to a pool print model with universal print anywhere. But I think that that's the sort of thing that AI is driving from a behavior point of view. It's better data, but it needs to therefore be within the walled garden, if you like.
Yeah, no, I really like your term there, page, not paper, and it's very much about protecting the data and having access to audits, reporting logs and so on. And yeah, it's an interesting point you mentioned about Microsoft and universal print, because do you see in that case the kind of death of the print driver? And you mentioned, you touched upon it there, and how is that going to impact some of the ISVs and partners in the industry? And, just interested in your thoughts on that.
Sure. I mean, print drivers are established and understood to be, a complex piece of software that is an executable that runs with often elevated permissions on people's desktops. So they're an endpoint security concern. Microsoft's recognized this since the print nightmare attacks, and they want to eradicate drivers. So when they say that, they want to eradicate the driver as we know it. The driver that, as we will know it, will be the PSA or the print support application, and it will be a properly secured flow within the IPP printing stack. And what's really interesting, and we've had this with a customer recently, is you need to think ahead about what the restrictions are of using a solution like this. Because if you buy, an advanced saddle stitch finisher with edge trimming, the Microsoft Universal Print class driver may not be very good at implementing that. Some of the things that many of our, value-added vendors do in the industry require or leverage proprietary drivers. And one of the things they're really good at is the distribution of the drivers, the bundling of them, the securing of them, and then the onboarding and provisioning of drivers. But at the end of the day, it's about achieving those value-added capabilities, security watermarking or transactional print capabilities. Leading edge trim, saddle stitch booklet finishing is something that people still want. And so we're actually going to see, I think, a bit of an evolving space there where some features will make their way into the IPP printing capabilities. They're attributes that can be described, and we need to be able to poll the printers for those features and make sure the driver is populated. Unfortunately, still about sort of 7 layers deep, clicking advanced and going to extra features. But PSAs may actually improve the flow of that rather than using the Microsoft Universal Print class driver. But there's certainly no doubt that this is sort of some of the expertise that our colleagues and partners in the value-added space have really mastered, and they're very good at doing it. And if they can bring the kind of phishing-resistant, passwordless convenience without compromise to the table as well, then I think that there's a very bright future for those solutions, because Microsoft may be able to do anything, but they can't do everything. Like most developers, they have to work out where they're going to play and what the solution is going to be.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting because we've just finished some research which revealed, I think it was around 50% of IT decision makers say their top IT management challenges managing the provision and deployment of print drivers, and it's also their top security concern. So I think there is a stronger awareness around IT decision makers around the administrative burden around print drivers, but also the security potential security challenges as well. And I think, like you say, Microsoft is trying to address some of those, but there'll always be a need for ISVs to add that additional value-added areas around accounting, reporting, but also stronger security around the pull printing side of things. So it'll be interesting to see how that all plays out. And I think AI, as you say, is a very key to the future of cybersecurity in general, as well as print security. So on that note, I really want to thank you for giving so much detail around what Datasec is doing, but also your views on identity management in the print industry. So with that, could we finish by you maybe telling us what you think is next for the print industry and what's next for Datasec as a company?
Absolutely. And, I think reflecting on this as we do daily when we've got this extensive experience of the industry, it's interesting to see what has become known as digital transformation, or the type of behaviours that we expect from these devices. And I think a really interesting way of looking at that might be how some of these models, especially with younger generations and what they expect from the page, whether it's the paper or the digital format, sort of flipping some of the models on its head. So the idea of, when you want to print, going, opening the document in Word, hitting File, Print, drilling down in a driver to get the landscape and portrait, double-siding, black and white, printing the document, logging into the printer, pulling the print out, can actually be flipped by signing directly in on the printer and just grabbing the Word document immediately. So it's sort of file print to print file as a kind of a complete flip of that paradigm. And that, when you think about it, really changes the whole concept of, pull printing. Do we need a virtual queue to print to if we just go straight to the document? So this is a sort of an object-oriented view of the document, of the page, and of digital distribution. And as a digital transformation, it's an interesting case because it's not an expensive, multi-year, multi-million-dollar software-centric project. It's a simple change in behaviour that can make the end user more productive. And if you can have more productive staff, you can be more competitive. And I think that's what we're trying to get to with all value-added solutions is to make our customers better at doing what they do, with really productive solutions. And this is where security can get in the way, and the convenience without compromise is so important, because people don't sign into these devices for fun. Well, some of us do, but people want to sign in so that they can have a productivity experience, and that's where productivity apps and a productivity cloud like the Google Cloud, like the Microsoft Cloud, is going to become such an important sort of center of that solar system that customers are orbiting their solutions around. So identity is very important there. We would like to think that what we're bringing to the industry at large is a very expert range of domain knowledge that can help the OEMs and the other partners solve these problems using industry standards and best practice and state-of-the-art solutions that put the customer at the center and make change management minimal. And I think that feels like a very exciting place to be. After my career in so many of the OEMs, I feel like I'm in a really exciting and interesting place to be pushing things forward.
And that's great. And I think it really circles back to, as you say, the focus Datasec has on convenience without compromise and putting identity at the centre of this broader security ecosystem. So some really great points you've highlighted today. So thank you again for joining me. Well, it's great to have you on the show.
Thanks, Louella. It's been a great pleasure.
So thank you for joining today's episode of In the Spotlight with Quocirca. For more information, please visit quocirca.com and be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Thanks again for joining, and I look forward to seeing you in our next episode.